Greetings and welcome, everybody. This is another one of the great read-throughs we're all here for. Want to say big thanks to CANY, the Cannabis Association of New York, and the Rochester Public Library for helping and co-presenting on this New York State regulation read-through. We're picking up where we left off last call on page 181. Section 123.11, microbusiness ownership interest, business authorizations and prohibitions. If you're just tuning in for the first time, know that we have probably at least a half dozen of recorded sessions leading up to this point. We've been meeting every Tuesday and Thursday from noon to 1:15, depending on the day. And we're going to keep on cruising through until we've completed this read through. Today, I'm joined by my two incredible legal co-hosts, and I'll let them introduce themselves before we dive in. So Jason, send it your way.
Thanks, Zach. Jason Klemick. I chair the policy committee for CANY, as well as the tax committee for the cannabis section for the Bar Association, and I co-lead the cannabis practice at Barclay Damon. Elise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Bergio. I am also in policy for CANY. I'm executive leadership for NISBA, so Jason and I are just on everything together. And I am general counsel for two women-owned businesses in Lewiston in the cannabis space.
Cool, great. And my name is Zach Sarkis. I am chair of the education committee for CANY. I work with the Rochester Public Library and help in building out cannabis programming. Also a small business owner and been working in cultivation and kind of consumer packaged goods space. So I bring kind of like the hands-on perspective, and these two are some legal brains, some of the best in the state. So we're really lucky to have them here. Per usual, there's a couple ways to interact here. There's the Q&A and there's the chat. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A and/or let me just open up the chat here, make sure it's open for everyone. Chat is now open for business. And yeah, so this is the best. We find these sessions the best when you ask questions. We all bring our own perspective to the table, and it creates more of like, a diverse perspective here. And so, we're, I think, probably around week or 25 days left in the comment period. It may be more or less, but what we're reading through is the proposed regulations. And part of the proposed regulations by law is enabling a comment period open to the public. So as we're reading through these regs, we'll be offering our perspective, maybe some critical analysis and/or kind of ideating around what alternatives are to what we're seeing in these proposed regs. So the way to interact with the comment period is, one, ask for more clarification if it's not clear on what OCM is saying or why. Two would be to offer kind of a counter proposal saying, we don't like this, and this is why, and this is what we would recommend. So those are kind of different ways we're looking at this and working with this as we're moving through the comment period as individuals and with associations we're connected to. And that'll definitely frame the conversation we have here. So again, do not hesitate to ask questions, jump in the chat and the Q&A, we're here for it. And I will share my screen.
And I just want to say one thing too, before we dive into microbusiness specifically, is this morning, I happened to be looking into a couple things, and I was reading the New York State Farm Brewery law. And one of the things I noticed, and it seems to me, but feel free, anybody who has more knowledge, because admittedly, I do not have knowledge about the alcohol beverage control law. It seems to me that, the micro business license is kind of based more on the farm brewery, farm winery type thing. And one of the things that I found very interesting in that is farm breweries, wineries, so on and so forth, can sell each other's products. So a farm brewery can sell the product of another farm brewery in their, retail operations. And what we're going to find out here is that unless you have I think it's, catastrophic failure, you cannot sell other people's products. It is yours. So despite the fact that this law, the MRTA, was heavily influenced by the alcohol law, that is one specific thing that, seems very different. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Keep that in mind. If that's a comment that people want to make, I say go for it, but keep that in mind.
Yeah, and so that actually is a great opening up to what the microbusiness actually is. As we'll see, a microbusiness allows for cultivation, processing, distribution, and retail / delivery opportunities under a small license type. So it's technically vertical integration on a very limited canopy, limited size, which is touted as this great opportunity for small, mid-sized businesses, but also it's really, really complex and likely expensive to do every single aspect of this. Oh, on-site consumption too. Yeah, thank you, Danielle.
I'll kick it off, Zach.
Yeah, great. Let's send it.
Okay. A micro business shall engage in cultivation in at least one of the following additional activities authorized by cannabis law for a micro business. So you can't just be a cultivator. You have to also include either a processing, distribution, or retail sale. If authorized through the application process, a micro business may sell cannabis to a processor, sell cannabis to a distributor, sell cannabis products it has cultivated or processed to consumers, sell products via delivery to consumers, and send cannabis or cannabis products to a processor for processing without relinquishing ownership of that cannabis or cannabis product.
Which is something to note. So they don't acknowledge on-site consumption in that, which is interesting. I don't know if it comes up later, but just want to just acknowledge that it doesn't explicitly say on-site, though I was on the impression that would also allow for. So I don't mean
it does say it in a later clause. It says
great.
You have the opportunity to opt in to on-site. I think it's at the very end of this of this section.
Great.
A micro business shall not purchase cannabis cultivated by another cultivator unless the micro business suffered a significant crop failure or defined by the office and received prior written approval of the office. A micro business or the true party of interest in a micro business may be a TPI in a cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, or ROND license. Which is interesting because you're not in the law. Technically, the MRTA says very distinctly you are not allowed to hold a micro and a cultivator license.
And then there's a reciprocal provision under the cultivators that allows them to be TPIs in a micro business. And then is there the chance there, and I've been trying to think of scenarios, that there's the whole undue influencing, because you actually are reaching that retail tier through the micro business, but the fact that they can't buy cannabis from other cultivators kind of puts a hard line there. But what about, branding, or once we go federally legal, what happens for out-of-state products? So I think there's a lot of question there.
Totally.
So Jeff asked, do the processor and distributor allowances de facto allow wholesale sales to other retailers?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm under the impression yes as well.
Yeah.
There's nothing prohibiting such. Like, there's no mandate that you have to be a retailer.
Yeah.
And then just quickly, there was a question about the cost of licenses. That was
we did that earlier in section. Licensing fees, it was an earlier read through. Processors, the cap of a processor license is like $7K. Distributor, I think, is $7K. There's a multitude of tiers for cultivators, and micro is, I don't remember. So
so we have cool.
Micro is 4,500 for regular, half that for social equity.
Yeah,
great. Thank you, Wendy. And no worries, Coakley. It's all good. Just know it's awesome. We have a bunch of stuff in the past, and it's great. We can cross-reference live action. So happy to answer some of those questions. And if you do have follow-up questions, happy to answer those as well.
Okay, so no party shall be a TPI in more than one micro, provided, however, a passive investor may be a passive investor in more than one micro business if such passive investor complies with all ownership, control, and interest requirements and prohibitions of cannabis law in this chapter.
So here's a question. TPI, micro business can be a TPI in a cooperative. Assuming that's the case, then a cooperative could technically be a TPI in a micro business, but they can't be a TPI in more than one. So just like if you're, essentially it's saying a micro business could be part of a cooperative, but could more than one micro business be part of a cooperative? That doesn't seem, this little section right here seems to negate that.
I feel like that needs
so a micro business or its TPI interest may be a landlord, financier, or a goods and services provider to an adult use cultivator, processor, distributor, co-op, micro, or ROND license, subject to all restrictions governing such relationships, including but not limited to undue influence, control, and true party of interest requirements. I think that they're going to have difficulty, just to go back to your question, Zach, of having micros and co-ops. Because if you're a decision maker in the co-op and you're making decisions for all the micros on how things are going to be sold and where they're going to be sold, I don't know how you don't activate TPI in all these micro businesses.
So technically by law, it's one member, one vote. So
Right.
that is a unique thing that there would never. First and foremost, 51% of all cooperatives have to be labor owned and decision making, and labor could be loosely defined or very specifically defined. And then secondarily, by no means like can one party technically have undue influence in there. So if there was, let's just say, a few micro businesses, technically each micro business has one vote to represent its interest in the collective efforts there.
Right, but that would seem to, negate passive investor kind of status, and you would be a true TPI, not a passive investor.
Yeah,
because
it doesn't matter how many votes you get.
Right,
You're a
like
decision
you're
maker.
voting on every issue as opposed to saying, well, I'm not a manager, I'm just the money guy and I get to vote on whether the business gets sold or something.
It also doesn't matter how small of a vote you have, as long as you have a vote. Like when you're a TPI and if you're not activating as a TPI and you're part of the business, you can't have a say in regardless if it's only one vote out of 100 or whatever, you're still TPI if you have a vote in your decision making.
So obviously,
which is very difficult. Again, it's very difficult this is going to be a very hard structure as we talk about TPI more and more. It's obviously the most difficult component of this. Okay, so in addition to any other restrictions or prohibitions in this chapter, including but not limited to part 124, no micro business or its true party of interest is permitted to have any direct or indirect interest in, including but not limited to, being a TPI, passive investor, landlord, financier, or management services provider to a retail dispensary, on-site consumption, delivery, ROD, registered organization, or cannabis lab licensee or permittee. I think it's really funny that they're putting micro in the supply tier section.
I also think that this is going to be a big problem because technically, if you're a TPI in a micro and you own one share of some publicly traded cannabis company, you are violating that provision right there. There's no exception for that. You can't be a passive investor. So one share in a publicly traded cannabis company would violate you. Now, we hear that they're not going to enforce that, but then that starts to bring into question, is the enforcement then arbitrary and capricious, which is, a defined term under the law that regulatory agencies can't be arbitrary and capricious. So what does that mean? And also, does that mean that smaller businesses are going to be held to a higher standard? If you're a giant publicly traded company, you don't have to worry about your passive investors. But if you're a small business, you better be vetting them out every single time because they are potentially going to violate you on that.
100%. Okay, micro business operations. A micro business shall comply with all rules, regulations, and policies applicable to a cultivator in a tier with the same canopy size as a micro business. So unless otherwise set forth in this section, comply with all requirements imposed by the cannabis law in this chapter on licensed cultivators, processors, distributors, and retailers to the extent the micro business engages in such activities.
So that's a big one, just for everyone to note, like every single licensed activity you do, you get a cultivator license, you get a processor license, a distributor license, and a retail license under this micro business like aggregate license head. And each one of those, the individuals are required to abide by all stipulations and rules within every single license. So again, like it's one thing, like we've been looking at what a license can or cannot do. It's already a complex lift to look at just being a cultivator or just being a processor or just being a distributor, just being a retailer. But to put that all under one roof is a very complex set of requirements to record all the way through the entire process of your production process. So I wanted to double, triple underline, you're held to the standards of each one of those individual licenses bundled under this micro business license, and that's not a simple thing. Elise, you are good to keep cruising there.
Yep. So you cultivate with one of the following types of cultivation: outdoor, mixed light, or indoor. The microbusiness may cultivate within a specified type of cultivation as approved by the board on the licensee's application. The maximum canopy for each type of cultivation, unless otherwise approved by the board, shall be the canopy limits set out in section 120.3 C1 of this title.
So another interjection, like a lot of people I'm talking to who want to do the micro business expect that they're able to do outdoor for their extracts and indoor for their flower. And currently as it stands, it is one of the following types. So you're either an outdoor producer, a mixed light, or an indoor. Personally, as someone who's interested in the supply chain, plant touching, and has a lot of cultivator friends, I'm pushing against that. I think I will personally like to see micro businesses be able to have a combination of cultivation techniques ranging from indoor to outdoor or mixed, et cetera. So that's an example of like, okay, big red alarms there, making sure I'm submitting comments on that.
Yeah, NISBA also submitted that comment as well of can we have a combination of indoor and outdoor, or indoor and mixed?
Yep.
It helps diversify too. If you have a problem in one grow space, hopefully your other one offsets it.
Exactly.
I also just think like a lot of outdoor guys, especially, they're putting up pole barns during the winter to make sure that they're, product and things like that. I mean, it's almost inevitable to have indoor with an outdoor.
I do want to just, Coakley says, are there limitations on locations where these can happen? Are we able to do this on our home property? So zoning is going to be the biggest thing when it comes to all these license types. Home property, if you're in a rural area that's zoned for agricultural, you could probably cultivate outdoor, possibly indoor. I'd be curious about, if you have a barn, et cetera, that's compliant, but everything else is definitely going to be tailored to the appropriate zoning. And often that is not in a residential area.
Yeah, you also got to think you have to be very careful with that, right? Because if it's a home, they want to make sure nobody under 21 is getting anywhere near this. Typically, they don't really have residential in combination with licensees. But it all kind of depends if just as Zach said, if the zoning allows for you to make a singular building, no co-location with any residences, an outdoor or indoor, depending. Okay, so if authorized to process by the board or licensee's application, process no more than 1,700 pounds of biomass per year, unless the biomass is cultivated solely by the micro business exclusively at its licensed premises.
Which is just an interesting note. So that means you can source from another cultivator, you can source from other input, but you can't do more than 1,700 pounds of biomass per year. So that's specifically for extracts. Quick math, it's 30 to 40 pounds of biomass to make a kilo. So you could easily begin to deduce how many kilos of extract you could make from that particular yield, and then begin forecasting how many vape pens or how many gummies. But again, there's a cap if you're sourcing from other folks, but if you're doing it all in-house, you could do more than that, but definitely it would be hard pressed to get more than 1,700 pounds of biomass, at least on one outdoor season, on a 10,000 square foot canopy, for example.
And that would specifically seem to be for white labeling, because you can't purchase cannabis from other people, but if you can process up to 1,700, then what they're, I think, saying is that you could white label for somebody else and just, supplement your business by, running your extractor when you're not using it or something like that.
Okay. If authorized to distribute by the board of the licensee's application, distribute only their own cannabis products to retail dispensaries or on-site consumption sites. If authorized to conduct retail sales by the board on the licensee's application, sell only their own cannabis products to consumers. This is the point that Jason was making about the microbrewery law and how other people in alcohol space, even when they have a micro brewery license, are allowed to sell other people's products. We are seeing a lot of differences between what's happening in alcohol and what's happening in cannabis. I've been saying it's like SLA plus 10, the way that OCM is governing. It's as strict as alcohol, and then add a bit to it because it's limiting on municipality locations, and then obviously the supply chains. The two-tier approach is even more restrictive. So A lot of the comments that we're seeing on our end is if you're going to stick to alcohol, stick to alcohol.
So just a couple questions. Daniel says, can you do the white labeling yourself? I mean, it sounds like a micro business is able to white label. And so that's co-packing for somebody else essentially, or is it the inverse where they can put someone else's flower in their own product? Because white labeling can kind of go either way. You're either offering the service, putting someone else's brand around your product, or you're putting someone else's product in your brand.
I think it would have to be somebody else's brand, because if you put your own brand on it, well, maybe, I don't know. The key is you couldn't take possession of it if it wasn't your cannabis. So
Yeah.
Could you put your own brand on it? Would somebody else, presumably a micro business, send you their cannabis to put your brand on it to then sell in their dispensary? No, you couldn't do that because you can't sell. Well, I don't know.
You might be able to tap into their distribution network, for example. So, I mean, this is a clear example of like this is a clarification point where, like, earlier I had a remediation where I'd say, no, I would like to see them change this. This is where we say, OCM, we need clarification. What can we not do here, specifically with regards to white labeling?
Yeah.
And then just anonymous attendee, micros will be able to deliver directly to consumers. I think we'll cover that shortly.
Yeah, a big question we're having is whether or not you activate TPI with white labeling. I think that's a really undefined situation in the regs right now that could very well impact how this plays out in the market. Okay, so be authorized to have its retail dispensary premises in a location separate from the premises where it's cultivating or processing cannabis, provided, however, the retail dispensary complies with all of their zoning and operational requirements for a retail dispensary. For licenses in a city with over 1 million people, the retail dispensary premises is located in the same county as the cultivation and, if applicable, processing premises. And for licenses outside of a city with over 1 million persons, the retail dispensary premises is located within 25 miles of the cultivation and, if applicable, processing premises.
I mean, how many cities are there in New York that have over 1 million persons?
There's, I think, one.
Yeah.
It's New York City. Because Buffalo, I think, is the second largest, and they don't
second. I don't
Yeah.
even think we're at 1 million.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
so
the
either.
greater Buffalo area is 1 million, but not
Yeah,
the
like
city
Buffalo
itself.
itself is probably like 500,000, I would guess, maybe 600,000.
Yeah, like Rochester, I think, is 230-ish thousand within the city limits.
Yeah. Here's where I'm talking about the last clause of this is about on-site. A micro business may, pursuant to the approval by the board and the operating requirements in this chapter, be authorized for on-site use of adult use cannabis products. So I do think we're going to get some more distinct separation of like an on-site consumption lounge versus an on-site consumption use off of a retail dispensary. So if you guys recall, retail dispensaries are now going to be allowed to have on-site. So when you buy the product, you would be able to, go and do on-site with it afterwards in a separate separate room off of the dispensary. But then there's obviously also this on-site consumption lounge. Oh, wow. Buffalo's tiny, 276. I was off. I said 600,000, like a rookie. Anyways, the on-site use of adult use cannabis products for micro, I think, is leaning towards the retail dispensary component of it and not necessarily having an on-site consumption lounge license. Does that make sense? Where there's obviously this difference between an on-site license and on-site through a dispensary license, but they have to be more descriptive on what those differences are, because at the moment it's very vague.
Absolutely. I'm happy to pick up cooperative.
Yeah, pick it up.
Sweet. A cannabis cooperative license under Section 70 of the Cannabis Law shall publicly be referred to as a cannabis collective. A cooperative shall have the same authorizations and prohibitions as adult use cultivators, processors, and distributors, as provided in Part 123 of this title, to the extent that the cooperative engages in such activities, notwithstanding that, 1, a cooperative may conduct activities authorized for adult use cannabis processors at up to 2 premises. So 2 locations for processors. And a cooperative is not limited to the number of cultivation premises it may operate, provided that each premises over 6 premises, additional application and license fee may apply. So that's just important to note. A member in the cooperative shall not be a member of more than 1 cooperative. And a member in the cooperative shall be a true party of interest of that cooperative. So back to that micro business thing. But again, it's just strange that they allow for a micro business to be a TPI in a cooperative, but then prohibit you having more than 1 TPI in more than 1 cooperative. Where again, the point of a cooperative is essentially shared buying power, shared resources, centralized processing, manufacturing, distribution. So really, I do find it a little silly to exclude, just allow 1 micro business instead of allowing, however many to tap into that processing and distribution, not even, for the retail side of things. So it's interesting. In addition to our any other restrictions or prohibitions in this chapter, including but not limited to part 124, no collective or its true party of interest is permitted to have any direct or indirect interest in, including but not limited to being a true party of interest, passive investor, landlord, financier, or manager, service provider to a retail dispensary, on-site consumption and delivery license. Now, this is again, if you're TPI in a micro business, you're technically a TPI in said prohibited licenses, even though obviously it's under the guise of micro.
Well, because that's, it's under the definitions in the law. They're saying retail dispensary license, on-site consumption license, delivery license. Technically, a micro business license, you don't have those licenses. That's
true. So quick question, Jeff asked, can a micro business process in a premises separate from cultivation, i.e. processing and dispensary at one site, cultivation at another?
I don't know if the regs are that explicit. You can have retail dispensary at another location, but I don't know if you can process and cultivate. I don't think they contemplate that particular
It's
point.
silent on that in the regs, but I don't think it's a no, but it is very specific on the retail store. So I don't know, maybe it is no.
And presumably, because it says like you have all the other authorizations and prohibitions. If you had a cultivation license and a processing license, there's nothing that says they have to be on the same premises. So if you look at it that way, it may allow for separate, but yeah, they're going to have to be more specific on that.
A cooperative license under this chapter shall be organized as either a traditional cooperative or a cooperative association. A traditional cooperative shall have all voting rights held exclusively by members that contribute to the collective primarily with labor. So such members shall each have 1 vote, comprise of no less than 2/3 majority on the governing body, maintain a controlling interest in the traditional cooperative at all times, own no less than 51% of equity of the traditional cooperative at all times, and not have their capital or interest subordinated to the interests or capital of any other member group or shareholders.
So what's interesting about these co-op licenses is when they started drafting these regulations, they realized that the law violated the co-op law. So they had to do that in accordance with state law. So these aren't actually exactly the way that co-ops work. It had to be in the mechanism for which cannabis could then be utilized in a co-op format. But I don't even know anybody who's doing a co-op. Do you guys?
No,
I don't know one person. Although they're really pumping this license up like it's going to be a hot thing, a hot item. I don't know one.
yeah,
You do know one. I'm just being very quiet.
I get the distinct.
Sarkis.
Yeah. I'm definitely
That's how
interested.
you do so much about voting rights.
I have not been doing my research. I'm definitely interested.
Laughing. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I get the distinct impression that they want to favor these. Like if you go in with a co-op and you meet all the requirements, seems like they want to give those licenses.
Yeah, it's definitely also really complex, as we've said. Like there's kind of contradictive language, and by no means is said thing easy. But it does seem like a very a unique opportunity for small and mid-sized producers to work together when we know where the market's going. You know, down, down, down. And
What about for like the accelerator license? Are you guys waiting to see what that is more so?
the what?
The accelerator license?
What is that? Where is this?
So it's not in the regs yet, but the accelerated license is basically like, I think it's gonna be for like social equity applicants or people who are looking to do like an incubator program. And they're gonna call it an accelerator license, which could very well be like small businesses all teaming up together.
Cool.
But in a singular, but they haven't put those regs out yet.
Interesting.
I love hearing this. I'm glad to hear that people want to do co-op though, because I feel like
there's
going on.
Definitely a lot of interest, and again, just even in this chat, that's great. And acknowledge that it's definitely complex, and consensus building and like all of these mechanisms at play is no simple lift. So, you know, I'll say I have an assumption as to what's possible and ways to do it. I don't have a clear pathway, so it's like I'm definitely interested, and you know, as the state is, but it's I think we got to get a lot more clarity on what's allowed and what's not allowed, as we'll see, and I'll probably allude to through this process.
I'm so glad I just got called out on this, that everybody's like, I want to do co-op. I'm like, I'm glad, because I didn't know. Now this is good to hear.
Yeah.
Taking these comments back.
There we go. Cooperative must own and control 51%. So I think this is the own. So the labor must maintain a controlling interest of the traditional cooperative at all times, own no less than 51%, not have their capital subordinate to the interests of any other member group, own and control the cooperative, and its profits, earnings, and losses distributed to members based on labor and not based on capital investment. So that one is very much like structured kind of by the books of a traditional cooperative. There's a lot of different resources you can look up to understand traditional cooperative models, specifically in agriculture. And I think that's a really unique kind of reference point there to dig in. The cooperative association, I think, is more unique and has less examples to source from, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just it's not as common as the traditional, at least in the general narrative at large. Yeah, and even Jess just says, I have been part of a cooperative efforts in California. One challenge was separately defined from establishing ag and worker and consumer co-ops. So yeah, there are a bunch of different cooperatives. There's agricultural cooperatives, there's consumer cooperatives, there's multi-stakeholder cooperatives, and beyond. So we are definitely the traditional cooperative in this sense is talking about an agricultural cooperative and would have to adhere, if I'm not mistaken, to the agricultural cooperative structure that is required by New York State in general to like qualify as a cooperative. So there's both like the rules and regs, but then there's also like, if you're forming your governing body, your business structure as a cooperative, there's certain things you have to adhere to that I think we'll see a little further below. A cooperative association shall have 51% voting rights in the aggregate held by members who contribute to the cooperative primarily with labor. Such members shall, 1, not have their capital contributions proportionally tied to voting rights, be comprised of no less than half of the governing body, receive distributions from the cooperative based on their labor contributions, receive no less than 50% of profits provided shareholders exist and are receiving distributions, own no less than 51% of the equity of the cooperative at all times, and own and control the cooperative. They may also permit member contributions to consist of tangible or intangible personal property or any other benefit to the cooperative, including money, labor, services, promissory notes, agreements to contribute, and contracts to be performed unless otherwise provided by the cooperative's internal rules. They permit, before determining the amount of profits, its governing body to set aside a portion of profits to create or accumulate a capital reserve, reasonable reserves for specific purposes, such as expansion or replacement of capital assets or education, training, information. May permit distributions be made in any form, including cash, capital credits, and allocated patronage equities. Permit distributions to shareholders to be based on their capital contributions and generate returns for members and shareholders based on profitability distributions, profitable asset sales, refinancing, and or through a liquidity event. A cooperative shall have no fewer than 5 members that contribute primarily with labor. And I just want to note, like, this primarily with labor thing, like, labor isn't defined in this.
Correct.
And so, like, your social media intern is labor. Your farm team is labor. You can really look at if anyone who's contributing to the value through their hourly or through their wage, I think could be defined as labor or may need to be defined by the OCM for further guidance.
Marcus, we should add this on the, that's a good comment for clarification. Please define labor. How is labor defined?
Yep. And Jeff asked, does contributing primarily through labor mean cooperative operations, or my labor made this flour for the cooperative to process and sell? I interpret it as the latter, that I actually a hybrid, that there is cooperative operations, and then there is, farms being an individual stakeholder that produces their own kind of like labor contributions that is this flour.
I would definitely ask for clarification though, because we gotta definitely need to know what those totals are.
But I think you're right, Zach. It would have to be hybrid, because if you had one cooperative member who was also kind of doing a lot of the administrative stuff, they may necessarily produce a little bit less, but they should still be compensated for the fact that they're kind of doing all the administrative stuff. So yeah, it would seem that it would have to be hybrid to be fair.
Yeah. And the office may request documentation and other support evidence to verify the validity of the applicant's cooperative formation as described in the cannabis laws, regulations, and guidance. So I think this breaks it down. It's not here, but it does say elsewhere, like getting a certificate, a letter of approval from a certified cooperative like association group, like a trade association for cooperatives that says this is a valid approach of a cooperative. The alternative is like a CPA to show like the mechanics of the back end of the cooperative to ensure the structure and like the financing and the financial movement is in alignment with a cooperative, which is interesting. And cooperative operations, relatively short here. A cooperative shall abide by all the operational requirements of each license type of license activity it performs in accordance with the law and of this chapter. Then a cooperative shall notify the office of any changes in its membership within 30 days of such change. Let's just look at that. You got to, if someone on your TPI gets a DWI, you need to notify OCM within what was it, a week or
3 or 5 days?
I think it was 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days, but you can change membership and it's a 30-day comment, which is like, that's appropriate. But like, back to that whole conversation about notifications, it's like, holy crap. So I do want to just acknowledge again, like 51% of ownership, 51% of control by labor contributing members. That could be C-suite, that could be a farm collective, that could be labor pool within the cooperative mechanism. Yeah, it could also again be designers, like anyone who's kind of contributing to the overall like flow of the cooperative model, and the value there is essentially, it's just like, as long as you're not an investor or a passive like retiree, who may still have voting rights, that you're contributing with that labor. So definitely opportunity to clarify there, but I think the cooperative association allows for a lot more creativity than the traditional cooperative. And I think creativity and flexibility is going to be really, really important no matter what in the next 5 years for all businesses, just understanding how fast this market expands and contracts, and kind of the limited safeguards intact. So definitely interested in the cooperative, happy to kind of nerd out on that a little bit. But there's definitely, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity, but with that I think justifies again the request for clarification. So you're not building something out that isn't allowed, and you don't want to like build out a business model, try to raise funds or like bring a community together just to learn that it's actually not what they have in mind. And when things are so vague, that is a risk. If you have these assumptions, it's kind of like, it doesn't really ask to, build it and then ask for forgiveness. If it doesn't fit the model, then it's kind of a hard stop, and even more reason to engage with the OCM in this process. Yes, cooperatives can cultivate, they can process and distribute. Also, something that isn't clear to me is like this cooperative, actually, I just want to go up and make another comment here. Let's just say like members being, are members independent, or is everyone under one? Is it everyone under the license, or are cultivators specifically under their own license but can be partnered on a cooperative? So like licensing structure.
Yes, you want to know, like, are you guys all under one LLC, or do you have 20 LLCs and then you guys are all under the header of a co-op?
Yeah.
Well, and if I recall correctly, I think it says that that all members, under the law, this is our section 70, 70 parentheses 3, a cooperative member shall be a natural person and shall not be a member of more than one adult. So if you're a member, weirdly, you need to be a natural person and not an LLC, but that could, from a legal standpoint, that's not great. Like, it would be much better to be your own LLC and then be a member of the cooperative so that you could segregate on liability potentially.
Yep. And I do think sovereignty and the opportunity for sovereignty and independence and folks to plug into, again, if the cooperative is serving as a processing and distribution hub, you want to work with your members who are, obviously there's alignment, and it's important to have like, vision and strategy to ensure the value in the supply chain that you're building. But sovereignty definitely makes most sense. And again, what you're going to, even just the way that the license, we look at canopy, it's like if you have 5 different farms, you can grow this amount. So it's structured as if individuals, but back to the actual law, the MRTA seems to kind of contradict this it's license coming to the table instead of just individuals coming to the table.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting overlap here too, because it's my understanding that we can obviously co-location is going to be allowed, and there really isn't a cap on how many licenses can be co-located. But we get into this issue, right, where like co-location versus co-op is very different, because co-location, you have to separate out all like trim rooms and packing, and it has to be all very separate, where co-locating has that added benefit of like overlap, right? Which is you could have like one large scale greenhouse that houses 10 small growers or something like that, and you're together on all of those processes, even though they're all different license holders.
Yeah, so it's definitely inspiring, it's definitely complicated, and it's seemingly vague and even contradictory with the MRTA. So there's a lot of red flags there. And again, as someone who's like in general interested and a little bit wary, those are big roadblocks that like, my biggest concern is that this comment period won't provide enough insight or context to deliver that. And so it's like, how do we actually begin to present models and have like a thorough kind of exploration instead of this like loose back and forth with the OCM through a comment period. So it's tricky.
Well, so we were just talking about this, Jason and I, last week, about whether or not they're going to activate a 45-day comment period. And if they activate the 45-day comment period, it means that they're substantially altering the regulations to the point where they have to get comments again, right? And if they've missed, buckets of information in the regs and things like that they aren't separating out, you're gonna have to activate this 45-day comment period.
Or
so
like we're about to get into potentially changing a restriction in here that, we're going to read about in the next couple of sections. Potentially
this restriction. Also, there's like language that Jason and I talked about where like priority licensing versus social equity descriptions are not overlapped properly. They like omit
Mm.
minority and women in the priority, but they're defined in social equity. So if those changes do happen, they're going to have this 45-day comment period. If they have a 45-day comment period, we're going to be in a good luck chuck getting apps going by August.
I mean, rumor mill is that like applications open up around August, which like feels slow and feels fast, you know, at the same time. It's crazy just how much is swirling around at once.
Yeah, I mean, just with how long like the regulatory publishing process is and the review and
yeah, the average number of days between when they announce the regulations and when they actually get published in the register is 20 days alone. That's been the average.
Actually, I want to address Jeff's question. In the example of a worker-owned processing cooperative, do these regs even affect that, or is it just a business type choice for the ownership and processing license? Like, I want to say again and again and again and again, like true equity in an industry is ownership, and any business model can be a cooperative, you know, and any business model can have employee ownership. And so like by nature, you could have a dispensary that actually is a cooperative the way that it's structured and run by ownership rights and voting rights and mechanism. Now there isn't a license type that is a retail cooperative. So, you know, you could get your retail license and then organize your business structure to fit the code of employee owned cooperative. I would go so far as to say, talk about prioritization. I would say any business that is trying to create a cooperative model deems the right of prioritization if the baseline is equity and ownership in this industry. There's no greater way to promote diversity, ownership, inclusion than literal ownership, but that's just like my 2 cents.
And we can, I mean, it's pretty easy to do in like an LLC operating agreement. I tell my clients all the time, like the operating agreement can pretty much say anything that's not illegal. So if you want to set it up and bind your business to the cooperative principles, you can absolutely do that.
Don't mind my spelling. All right. The mysterious ROND. Jason, you want to take a swing at it?
Sure. So, all right. Registered organization, cultivator, processor, distributor, ownership, interest, business authorizations, and prohibitions. No person shall be a true party of interest in more than one ROND, provided, however, a passive investor may be a passive investor in more than one ROND if such passive investor complies with all the ownership, control, and interest requirements and prohibitions of the cannabis law and chapter. That's a specific nod to the fact that most of the ROs are publicly traded. An ROND or its true party of interest may be a passive investor in a cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, or micro business licensee. That's interesting because that essentially means that an RO could fund another adult use cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, whatever. So they could have other adult use interests and getting kicked back profits. They just can't take control and trip the, or go over passive investor. But 20%, remember, if it's not a publicly traded company, that threshold's 20%.
And is there, it's not explicit. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you think part of that was because they were looking at MSOs to help put together money for the social equity fund?
I mean, it could be, but they're charging such massive fees anyways to these guys. Like, they're getting a lot of money. I don't know. I mean, why allow an RO to be up to 20% equity holder in another adult use license? Like, what's the purpose?
And is it capped on one? A ROND or its true party interest may be a passive investor.
I don't see that as
it a singular or me neither. And
because
that's kind of like,
if it was a singular, I think they would say not more than one or something like that.
Like which we've seen elsewhere. Yeah.
Right. So interesting.
Yeah, I don't think it's singular.
Yeah. All right. An ROND or its true party of interest may be a landlord, financier, or management service agreement provider to a cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, microbusiness, and the ROND license provided the ROND is and its true party of interest do not exceed authorized true party of interest limits set forth in the cannabis law chapter. In addition to any other restrictions or prohibitions in this part, no ROND or its true party of interest shall be permitted to hold a direct or indirect interest in or be a true party of interest, passive investor, landlord, financier, or management services provider, or by any other means to a retail dispensary, on-site consumption, delivery, ROD, registered organization, or cannabis laboratory licensee permit or permittee. Registered organization, cultivator, processor, distributor operations. An ROND.
Also, can we just say that the ROD, ROND, and registered organization distinctions are so annoying? Like, stop saying registered organization. Now it's just ROD and ROND. Like,
Yeah, because reading that one that an ROND can't be a TPI and an RO. I mean, technically they are.
ROs are gone. ROs are gone. It's either an ROND or it's an ROD. Like, this is stupid. I don't like it.
Yeah. They just call them medical cannabis
I
companies.
hate it here. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, an ROND shall comply with all the requirements set out for adult use cultivators, processors, and distributors in this chapter, including part 113 of this title. Maintain a medical patient prioritization plan, which shall be submitted to the office every 6 months, unless otherwise determined by the office. The medical patient prioritization plan shall include, but is not limited to, monthly sales volume data for each of the last 12 months, broken down by registered dispensing site, maintenance of a sufficient medical cannabis product to support the greater of the highest monthly sales volume generated by the applicant in the 12 months or a minimum threshold set annually by the board based on the anticipated medical cannabis demand for that year and the number of registered organizations in operation. And if nobody saw, they're adding a new one, Hudson Health, I think it is.
Yep.
Through the lawsuit that was just determined. So there is going to be a new RO coming online.
Which I think indicates they're going to open up another medical round.
I agree. An attestation that the ROND shall always have products in different concentrations and dosage forms available to certified patients at all times, including but not limited to at least one product that has a higher ratio of THC to CBD, at least one product that has a higher ratio of CBD to THC, at least one product that is equivalent ratio of THC to CBD. Seeds or immature plants for medical home cultivation in accordance with part 115 of this title, and any other requirements as determined by the office. And
It's interesting that they mandate that people have, that these RONDs have seeds or immature plants, you know, it's a requirement, which is an interesting note.
Mm-hmm. An ROND shall not have more than 100,000 square feet of canopy unless authorized by the board in writing.
Which is actually really crazy because these guys didn't have canopy limits in medical. And so now all of a sudden there's canopy limits after these guys have created these massive structures. It's just brutal.
Bought buildings that are like 300,000 square feet.
Yeah, isn't that Columbia Care in Rochester has like a 325,000 square foot building?
I don't know how much they have. Begin new construction or major renovation of any indoor cultivation area or facility unless authorized by the board in writing. Process more than 55,000 pounds of biomass or equivalent amount of cannabis extract or cannabis product per year if the ROND has purchased any cannabis or cannabis product from another licensee in that county.
I know ROs are pissed about that one because I think they process even for each other more than that.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Interesting. Contract with a laboratory permitted pursuant to part 130 of this title for voluntary testing services unless authorized by the office, and substitute adult use cannabis products should the licensee experience an unexpected shortage of medical cannabis products, which I find is weird. Like, we know that there's going to be some differences in like the testing and stuff like that, but for anything that has equivalent testing requirements, it's weird that they would say that you can't make up a shortfall in the medical side with adult use products. I mean, again,
also, like,
requirements.
Does anybody understand that in medical programs in every other state, it's the same weed? I mean, it's just different. It's priced differently. and you're accessed more to it. Like this idea that there is medical cannabis specifically that people are growing. I mean, you might pick a different strain and you're going to do more 20 to 1s and 30 to 1s and things like that, but it's the same weed. Like I think I don't think the OCM understands that component. Like having 6 dispensaries or 7 or 5 dispensaries that are going to be 5 dispensaries that are going to be just medical only, like it's going to be hilarious. And you have to incentivize the medical program. You have to incentivize these patients to be getting whatever product they want at a cheaper price in order to keep a medical program to survive.
Mhm.
All right. Registered organization, adult use, cultivator, processor, distributor, retail, dispensary, ownership, interest, business authorizations, and prohibitions. No person shall be a true party of interest in more than one ROD, provided, however, a passive investor may be a passive investor in more than one ROD if such passive investor complies with all the ownership, control, and interest requirements and prohibitions of the cannabis law in this chapter. An ROD or its true party of interest may be a landlord, financier, or management services agreement provider to another ROD, provided that such ROD is its true party of interest and its true party of interest do not exceed authorized true party of interest limits set forth in the cannabis law in this chapter. In addition to any other restrictions or prohibitions in this chapter, no ROD or its true party of interest is permitted to hold a direct or indirect interest in or be a true party of interest in a passive investor, landlord, financier, or management service provider, or by any other means to an adult use cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, microbusiness, retail dispensary, on-site consumption, delivery, RO, NDR, registered organization, or cannabis laboratory, licensee, or permittee. In addition to any other restrictions or prohibitions in this part, no ROD or its true party of interest is permitted to hold a direct or indirect interest in or be a true party of interest, passive investor, landlord, financier, or management service provider, or by any other means to a cultivator, processor, distributor, cooperative, microbusiness, retail, dispensary, on-site consumption, delivery, ROND, RO, or cannabis laboratory licensee or permittee, or any person licensed outside of New York State who are licensed to function as any of the aforementioned licensees. So all of that, what that just did is it knocked out every single multi-state operator RO from having an adult use dispensary in New York. This, what we understand, was not supposed to be in there. And therefore, I would think that if they took this out, that's a substantial enough change requiring public comment to mandate another 45-day comment period. Because again, this is saying, for example, Green Thumb Industries or Cureleaf is fully vertically integrated in Massachusetts, and I'm sure a number of other states. They could not, in one of their RO dispenser or one of their medical dispensaries here, co-locate an adult use dispensary under that prohibition. They could not do it. And apparently, you know, they very much want to do that. So yeah, that's going to be a big problem. And I think it has to mandate another comment period.
Or it's going to end up being litigious. It's like that. Those are the two options.
Mm-hmm. All right. Registered organization, adult use, cultivator, processor, distributor, retail, dispensary operations. An ROD shall comply with all requirements set out for an adult use, cultivator, processor, distributor, and retail dispensary in this section, as well as part 113 of this title. Dictate a minimum of 40% of the shelf space available for adult use product cultivated and processed by licensees that are not RODs.
So obviously, probably first choice is their TPI grows that they funded. But then secondarily, that could be an opportunity for small businesses to get in on these shelves, you know, where they'll have, you know, how many dispensaries per ROD is it?
Adult use, 3.
3. So they'll have 3, and each one of those has to have 40% shelf space that is not ROD. So just an interesting thing to note. Who's going to get that shelf space?
Which, like, for Axel, this is really important. He always uses the example of like Washington State versus Florida, right? Like Florida, you walk into a store, even though it's medical, and you look at like 80 SKUs and that's it. And you go to Washington and you walk into a store and it's like 1,400 SKUs.
Mhm.
I think that's a very big priority for OCM, is having options, which is a good thing. Having
Mhm.
options is a good thing.
Co-locate its medical and adult use dispensaries. If co-locating more than one dispensing site, have at least one co-located dispensing site outside of New York, Kings, Bronx, Queens, Richmond, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester counties. Be subject to the same prohibition set forth in section 123.16B of this title. Maintain a medical patient prioritization plan, which shall include all the requirements in 123.16A2, and maintain enough medical cannabis product at each co-located retail dispensary to support the greater of the highest sales volume generated by that dispensary in the last 12 months, or a minimum threshold set by the board based on the anticipated medical demand for that year and the number of registered dispensing sites in operation. Provide a separate medical consultation area within their dispensing sites. Have separate lines and access areas for certified patients and their caregivers, and comply with the Americans with Disabilities standards. An ROD shall not have more than 100,000 square feet of canopy unless otherwise authorized by the board in writing. Begin new construction or major renovations on any indoor cultivation area or facility unless authorized by the board in writing. Process more than 55,000 pounds of biomass or the equivalent amount of cannabis extract or cannabis product per year if the ROD has purchased any cannabis or cannabis product from another licensee in that calendar year. Contract with a lab permitted pursuant to Part 130 of the title for voluntary testing services unless authorized by the office. Substitute adult use cannabis products should the licensee experience an unexpected shortage of medical cannabis products. Have no more than 3 co-located dispensaries. Have more than one co-located facility in the same county or borough as any of its other licensed or registered dispensing sites. Locate any co-located adult use dispensary premises in a location prohibited under the cannabis law, and be granted authorization to apply for adult use retail before 3 years from the first date of adult use retail cannabis sale by a licensee authorized under the cannabis law. So that would be what, 2022, December 29th, 2025. They can't do any of this. So we'll see. And then probably very applicable if any part of this provision or this part or its application to any particular person or circumstances held invalid, the remainder of this part in its application to other persons and circumstances shall not be affected thereby. Yeah, I agree with Elise that if this is not dealt with, then yeah, there's going to be some litigation for the ROs, I think.
It's also unclear. So like obviously medical patients get that 7% tax on medical product, but there's nothing in here regarding medical patients buying adult use product in any sort of, discount or anything like that, which.
And I don't think they can, because adult use can't advertise discounts. They could give you one at the register if they wanted, but part of the problem is the THC tax would be part of that. So they would have to they would still have to collect the THC tax and adult use retail tax.
Yeah,
So-
like the thing is like a natural progression for adult use states. What ends up happening is medical programs start failing. Right? They're going to start failing at some point. It's going to happen. We only have 150,000 patients in a population of 19 million. So you're going to have this medical program that these guys only want to really dabble in adult use because they've been losing all this money. And the program will start failing, but our tax component of this is going to make it very difficult for patients to access a cheaper and more accessible adult use product. And what's going to end up happening is people are going to stop renewing their medical cards because there's no benefit to be a medical patient to buy adult use product, which then if they're not getting a good product out of medical, they'll just be buying adult use.
Mm-hmm. And
I do. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add to that too. It's not without a change to the law. If the medical program starts failing, they can't just stop, but still remain fully vertically integrated, because part of the law, section 68A, says they have to maintain their medical cannabis license. So they would still have to maintain at least their 3 medical dispensaries and 3, and they're fully vertically integrated.
5 medical dispensaries now.
Oh yeah, 5, in order to continue on the fully vertically integrated adult use side. So yeah, I mean, under the law, their hands are kind of tied.
I do want to say that we glazed over 123.19, which would be the delivery operations and requirements. And there also isn't on-site consumption in here. So it says reserved. So there is no definition or description of delivery yet, as well as for on-site. And we expect that to be coming soon.
I think they'll be paired up with research and development licensees and these accelerator descriptive license that they're talking about, like the incubation license that's been talked about since the law passed.
Yep. And so we're going to pause here, but I do want to say next section is part 124, general business requirements and prohibitions. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here with regards to undue influence, service management agreements, and controlling interests. Like, it's definitely in the weeds, but it's super, super important stuff that's really going to dictate who you're allowed to have on your team, how your team structure and or organizational structure functions, or cannot function, et cetera. So it's definitely really, really important next call.
And it throws some of the stuff that all the AUCCs were doing kind of on its head, because OCM obviously didn't have these regulations when AUCCs were entering into some agreements and stuff like that. So now everything has to be compliant by the time these regs go into effect, which could be a substantial change for some of the AUCCs.
Definitely, for sure.
And Carol just asked about, how do these regulations benefit and level the playing field for small businesses who want to participate in a regional effort to secure the products are organically safe and produced in a manner that keeps profits and growth circulating within the region, as opposed to being drained out by profit-driven public investors. There's definitely a bunch of stuff with regards to small and mid-sized business and prioritization of social equity applicants. Just in the rules, like we just covered, some of these medical companies can't get involved in the adult use side of things for 3 years since the first sale. So that is a buffer that prohibits engagement that should allow for small mid-sized business to begin to generate this kind of ecosystem that you're speaking of here. So though maybe not perfect, there has been a lot of intention to allow and support small mid-sized businesses. The whole true party of interest, capping how many people can have overlap or relationships in other businesses, the two-tier system that separates producers from retail. All of these things are reducing the chances of immediate market consolidation and allowing for diversity and really more businesses to apply and to operate in the cannabis supply chain. So I'd say there are a lot of initiatives, and there's been a lot of intentional effort to shape this in a way that supports small mid-sized business. And also on the flip side, if you look at all other markets around the country and in Canada, par for the course is mergers and acquisitions, big business deals, people getting bought out, restructuring, et cetera. So I do think that this is personally it's established to prevent that out the gate. But I bet you year 3, year 5, we're going to see things change and, watch everyone get bought out or not. But it's going to be a curious thing to watch.
We saw that in Oregon in less than a year of the adult use market. So it comes faster than you think.
It'll be really interesting too, because New York's take on this is pretty unique, and they're clear. And we know that they're basing a lot of this on the alcohol law, particularly the two-tier system. But as we've said time and again over the last 4 years, 5 years, cannabis isn't alcohol. So just because something worked or didn't work in alcohol doesn't mean that it will work or not work in cannabis. So it'll be interesting to see, does the, success of the two-tier system, and I don't even know if you can call it that in alcohol, but go with me for a second, will that translate to cannabis?
Also, I think it's going right over the heads of people, and especially with alcohol, our tax rates are way worse. We have a 280E tax on the federal level, and we have the reservations right next door to our dispensaries with no tax. So it's not, you can compare it to alcohol, but then level the playing field. It's just not, we're talking about way more substantial competition in this space coming in for people with small businesses. It's going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just even seeing in the chat, Anne was speaking about, in Canada, year 3 really there was market consolidation, and it's true. When there's oversaturation, there's a flooding of the market, price points drop, plummet. It becomes an industry of economies of scale. whereas like the margin becomes less and less. For many, the only option to survival is to be bought out or to sell. And if we look at most of these major corporations, like check any major cannabis corporation that's publicly held, publicly traded, the quarterly reports rarely show a profit, and if not, show tens of millions of dollars in losses. Now that could be because of expenses, like, you know, you can fluff your books up in a way, but like, you know, common knowledge is a lot of these businesses are floated on investor capital and injections more than they are a profitable business model. And there are certain businesses that can operate at a loss for long enough to make sure the rest of the market, you know, that doesn't have that bandwidth gets, you know, kind of lost, and that allows for this the acquisition and merger, you know, just to be a lot more streamlined. And it really does, like, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's what OCM is trying to prevent through the, you know, how strict this is in terms of cultivation, canopy size, things like that, is they don't want to be in the scenario of Oregon or really every other legal state right now, because every legal state ramped up its production because of COVID. Like there was a pop in cannabis, and now they're realizing, oh my God, we have too much, and the price is just hemorrhage. So OCM's trying to avoid that, and to the benefit of small businesses and farmers, because the big guys, they can probably absorb that. They have other state operations where they can lean on, but like the small businesses, if you don't sell through your product, like that, you spent that money and now you got to come out of your own personal savings to cover the difference or something like that. Like it's going to be very tough, and you also could potentially get knocked down a license tier if you don't sell through it all. So
also, when we compare Canada to this market, it's difficult, right? Because Canada is federally legal. They're allowed to export out medical to other countries and possibly adult use once other countries come live on adult use and they have those reciprocals. So you got to understand that they have a glut in Canada and they're allowed to export. So it's just that's brutal and comparative. Like we're talking about, we won't even be able to move it out of our state lines, right, guys? So glut in New York stays as a glut in New York. And yeah, Anne's right. I wouldn't base anything off Canada's just like its own little, Anne's earlier, it's like its own little world in Canada. But it is crazy, right? Like it took 3 years for Canada and it's federally legal. So it's just, you have to always have those things in mind, that like we have a lot of things battling against us. You have to be very passionate about cannabis, to say the least.
Yeah, and you know, I personally don't see federal legalization in the US coming anytime soon. I mean, the banking bill failed yet again. I think that's the 7th time now, and it's banking. It's literally allowing cannabis companies to bank easier, with not changing scheduling, nothing, and that failed to get through the legislature. So, you know, I think federal legalization is still years off.
Totally.
Yep. Well, really grateful for everyone being on the call today. Just really lively group, super interesting stuff. This micro business, this cooperative, and the ROD. Again, next time we're picking up on the general business requirements prohibitions, part 124, which is page 197. As always, big thanks to the Cannabis Association of New York and the Rochester Public Library for supporting us and helping us put on this platform and disseminating this information. We really believe that access to information is a foundation for an equitable industry. So thank you so much to Jason and Elise for your professional perspective, your legal perspective. It's really, really invaluable, and super grateful for your participation. And if you haven't been following us already, we meet every Tuesday and Thursday from noon until 1:15 until the regs are done. We're on 197, so I think we have probably at least 3 calls left. We've been covering about 30 pages per. You know, I'm already getting sad. I'm already missing you guys.
We'll have more regs, Jason. We'll have more regs.
And we can go through round 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
also,
God.
just so everyone knows, the 3 of us have been doing this for years now.
Years.
Since like the introduction of hemp.
I know. Couple bros out here. We like to see it.
Yeah. Oopsies. So yes, just saying, Eric, I'm posting, I just dropped the second link is the one in the chat to utilize. And yes, we're updating on the CANY YouTube. And yeah, big shout out to Ryan and everyone who's just, you know, leading minds in this industry who are participating in this, as well as anyone who's watching this recording. We're grateful to be of service, and we will see you all soon. Peace.